Welcome to our second episode of Conversations on Global IR at the GIGA. My name is Miriam Prys-Hansen. I'm a researcher here at the GIGA, and I lead our research group on global orders and foreign policy. This interview series focuses on research and above all practices of global IR at the GIGA and beyond. Global IR calls for globalizing the study of international relations by moving past Western-centric perspectives and embracing diverse voices, histories, and experiences from around the world. Through conversations with leading scholars, we explore how IR and social sciences more broadly can become more inclusive, pluralistic, and reflective of global realities, including questions of knowledge co-production and research partnerships with the Global South. Today's two guests embody that ambition, and we will hear much more about their trajectories and work in the conversation itself. For now, very briefly, to my right is Professor Antje Wiener. She holds a chair in political science and global governance and is also a member at the Faculty of Law at the University of Hamburg. Her work on norms, contestation, and global constitutionalism has shaped IR theory, and she has since long been a leading European voice in global IR. And we also have here Professor Nora Fischer-Onar. She's associate professor at the University of San Francisco. Her research connects IR theory with area expertise in Turkey and the Middle East, and she has written extensively on what non-Western experience can teach the discipline. The conversation will be led by my colleague, Dr. Sinan, research fellow at the GIGA, whose own work sits at the intersection of global IR, Chinese politics, and legitimacy in global governance. So let's get into it. Sinan, over to you.
Thank you so much, Miriam. And let me just say thank you so much, Antje and Nora, for accepting our invitation for this interview. As a junior scholar, I have long admired both of your scholarship, and I know both of you has highly influential scholars whose scholarship cuts between IR and other related disciplines, and have both made very important contributions on the theoretical front to various scholarship. And also, I should say, not surprisingly, both of you have been also very important voices in the emerging field of global IR. So I'm really excited that we have this chance to have this conversation with both of you on these subjects that are of great importance to many scholars, especially the emerging ones. And I'm, in the interest of time, I'm just going to get right into the topic. So I have a list of questions prepared beforehand, and I'd like to get started a little bit on both of your intellectual profile. Could you briefly introduce your current research interests and topics, and perhaps tell all of us a little bit of how did you arrive at what you're doing now in terms of interest?
Okay, well, thank you, Sinan, first of all, for these questions, and also Miriam for inviting us. Well, you asked for the current interest and topics. So I am looking mainly at norm-contestation and the changing global order. And I always had my interest here with regard to norm research, which is kind of my main thing, was always more in compliance was contested than achieved. So as compliance is something that puts things that don't function properly, or puts things right. Contestation allows us to look at issues which require attention in the global community. And so I'm more interested in change than in maintaining a given liberal community of the global West. So that's kind of a key thing. At the same time, I also appreciate international law and the rules-based international order. And so my question is we need to, the idea or the project is to scrutinize the rules of the international order and then see where do we require change and which rules are good to go and maybe developed further. And this basically sits on three principles. Maybe I'll throw those on the table. One is the quod omnis tangit principle. What touches all must be approved by all, which casts the view widely on the multiplicity of international participants, stakeholders, as I call them. I can say something about that later, but also the principle of contestedness, that everything is in principle contested because we're not living in one and the same community. So we're all socialized in different ways and have different kind of cultural background capabilities. And the final thing is the normative aspect, which is trying to achieve a balance of sustainable normativity, sort of something that works, but something that where we need to kind of take care that that the rules apply to everybody. And so that in some, that's kind of my contestation theory with more details to be perhaps addressed later.
Thank you so much, and hearty thanks as well to Sinan, to Miriam, to GIGA, and specifically, I think, the Wanago project, which has made it possible for me to be in this room with such a brilliant mind. So I'm very, very pleased to be here. And, thank you for this question. I think, in a way, for many scholars, we choose to do some form of intellectual therapy. The questions that always drive us personally are somehow questions that we also try and put our minds around from a scholarly perspective. And for me, the journey was really about someone who was living in Turkey, situated in a Turkish context. It was very complex, very rich, very troubled, and finding that as an IR scholar, that the available theories and frameworks didn't do a good job of capturing the rich realities around me or of explaining very important processes around me. So that's how I began my journey from area studies, comparative area studies, because to understand Turkey, you have to understand the Middle East, but you also have to understand Europe. Increasingly, you have to understand Eurasia. So really trying to onboard sort of comparative area studies expertise into an IR for language and so to IR audiences that can help us make sense of the big picture in a more realistic and accurate way, to Miriam's point earlier. And so, I got to where I am in the current work that I'm doing. One big milestone was in 2016 when I attended my very first International Studies Association conference. And Amitabh Acharya was the chair of the conference, and so he had coined this term global IR. He's a great science communicator and able to name things that lots of us are kind of working with and working around. And of course, the label is contested. We can talk more about that later. There's also post-Western IR, non-Western IR, various other ways of framing it. But the problem is real, right? The problem is that the toolkit we have doesn't do a great job of explaining things as they may look from other parts of the world, or even from within the liberal international order, which is presumed to be solidified or objectively out there, when in fact it's constantly, as Professor is constantly being contested. So this brought me to the general umbrella label of global IR, but I very much conceive that this is where my work comes in. I've edited several recent issues of International Affairs, of the Journal of Common Studies, of Global Studies, the Quarterly, and in each one of them, I'm trying to articulate concepts and frameworks that can help to broker conversations between area studies experts and IR scholars, and between our respective area studies communities, and see how those cross-fertilizing conversations can inform the bigger picture. So for the JCMS special issue, for example, I've worked on the notion of allyship, so a more solidaristic approach to alliances that isn't based on kind of atomistic self-interested cooperation in the case of internationalism, or competition in the case of realism, but really the idea of allyship, that there are hierarchies in the world, and that there are voices that are marginalized in the world, and how can we as agents in this world help to broker a space where marginalized voices get heard more, and can their concerns and realities can be better expressed. So that's an allyship is one thing I'm working on. Another way of getting at that I've developed together with Emil Kowalski for a special issue of Global Studies Quarterly. This is the idea of interlocking regional worlds. So thinking of our, instead of it being one liberal international order or one international system defined by power distribution, thinking from this area studies lens of sort of regions as worlds in and of themselves, but also not fixed, contested spaces where conversation can happen across regions, and that's part of that idea. I'm also thinking about methods and analytical frameworks one can use to broker these cooperations. So I have another JCMS article co-written with Sarah Wolf, Dave Ghazi, Daniel Huber on contrapuntal listening, how to listen to multiple voices in IR, how to listen to voices that silences and who's getting silenced. And then most recently, a piece for International Affairs, together with Indra, which I presented just a few days ago here at GIGA, on how to analyze what Amitabh Bachchan has called the multiplex world order, as differentiated from multiple order, a world with multiple actors, multiple regions, multiple voices, how to analyze that in its complexity without losing sight of parsimony. So this is what I'm doing now.
Thank you both very much. And I can see definitely that there's a lot of connection with the topic we're dealing with. So before jumping ahead, I would like to go back to Antje and ask a little bit about how does your work speak to global IR? So picking on one of the most important work contribution to the literature, which is theory of contestation, in which you hope that norm acquire meaning not through spontaneous diffusion, but through interpretation and actual social practices. So in your view, how does this perspective revise the conventional constructive account in which international norm emerge, diffuse, and internalized by participants? And how do you see, and in what ways do you think that this perspective speaks to the global IR's concerns and subsequent debates?
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you very much. I mean, to summarize, perhaps really briefly, together with Phil Orchard from the University of Wollongong, we summarized the 3 decades of norms research with 3 moves to say, kind of the first move focused on the social and looked at norms as structures, and was very interested in what you just said, the diffusion, the implementation, the learning. It's very kind of more of a top-down. It was very important because it brought the social into IR. So, and that kind of it moved constructivism onto the stage. So for us at the time when there was only realism and liberalism, when we were PhD students in the 90s, this was kind of eureka. It opened a lot of spaces for us. Then the second was really when norms research, kind of constructivism got traction, and there was more interdisciplinarity with international law, and the regimes literature, intersubjectivity came in. But the key thing was to understand interpretation of norms that were found in treaties and how to implement them. So that was kind of also a very kind of revealing and new field. And then the third move is really about norms as process, and Jackie True and Mona Crook are really big about that, and kind of a more critical literature, which basically brought the practice closer to the norm, because the first move kind of succeeded in decoupling practice from norms, because norms were defined as standards of behavior, aggregated standards of behavior to a community with a given identity. So clearly that was looking at the liberal community, kind of more Western Northern. And here's you already see kind of the move from a critical or more global view into IR to say, well, there's not just one community, there's many communities, therefore multiple identities. And so the big identity issue that constructivism brought in needed to be rethought. And so clearly what I tried to advance with the theory of contestation, which kind of followed the contested compliance in the early 2000s, was really to say, well, norms emerge through practice and change with practice. And therefore, norms don't just carry sort of standards of behavior, but also expectations towards normative and ethical values. And this is a really important aspect. And I think some of the people in our more recent work on norms in the handbook and the Contesting the World book, for example, Anthony Ruland and Jenny Welch have used that very nicely to explain the responsibility to protect, which to me is kind of a hybrid norm that rests on a principle and on the practice of how to implement a case of humanitarian intervention. And so these hybrid norms are usually where the press will say, or the official media, politicians, or even colleagues say, oh, R2P doesn't work because they're still talking. And I would say, oh, it's great because they are talking. We then learn more about the norm, and we generate more shared understandings about how the norm might work. So this is a key thing for me, that we have practice-based norms, and therefore we need to think practice and norms together. As Emanuel Adler used to say, norms lie in the practice. And so that's, I think, a key thing that I wanted to demonstrate also with this 2018 book on contestation and constitution of global international relations. That was very important. It was global because we had a global multiplicity of agents in a multi-log across boundaries.
Thank you, Antje. That's an excellent example of how our research that initially focused on European communities find its way into the whole global IR conversation. So turning on to Nora, you already listed many of the things that have been working on related to broader subjects. I'm just going to pick on one of the things that you mentioned, which is the interlocking regional worth framework that you worked on also earlier with Emilia Kabaski, which I found really, really interesting. Because that sort of understand word so they help us to understand word politics, not through the familiar image of a single international system organized around Western powers and categories. So I want to ask, what does this framework reveal that conventional theory of multipolarity, where regionalism do not capture, and how do you, in what ways do you think that really speaks to the concept of global IR? But also more generally, as you work through developing this framework, do you ever stumble upon or find particularly useful any particular non-Western intellectual resources to you?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think with this particular piece, which was the frame for the Special Issue of Global Studies Quarterly 2022, that we used this notion of interlocking regional worlds to invite a conversation that then brought people with historical perspectives, contemporary perspectives, John Hopkins on the Indian notion as an interlocking regional order, Manjit Pardisi on the Malacca is a sort of syncretic regional order, Aisha Zargol on the Mongols as a trans-regional kind of formation that bridged connectivities as well as brought regional violence everywhere that they went to. But so in that conceptual framing of it, we're basically building on the idea of worlding, right? And that worlds are constructed and they emerge, they have some geographical situatedness, right? But effectively what IR theory has been thinking of as the world or as the globe was really a North Atlantic regional cooperation, right? And framework for that regional cooperation, with kind of peripheral actors being various subsidiaries of that North Atlantic space in the Commonwealth, maybe Japan is an honorary member. And so it's a really very limited picture, right, of what the world looks like. Of the billions of inhabitants on our world, on our planet, the vast majority of them are not a part of that world. And so it's quite as David Kang has put it regarding sort of IR realist IR theory's treatment of China, it's not only sort of, analytically or ethically irresponsible to not include the other regional orders and worlds out there. It's also scientifically inadmissible. You're just not capturing what's going on for most of the people on planet Earth most of the time. And so especially at this very fraught times when these traditionally marginalized or overlooked regional worlds are exerting agency, are able to channel growing forms of economic resources, growing normative resources, resources that draw on some shared histories, some situated histories. We thought it was really important to find a framework that honored the multiplicity of worlds out there without reifying them, right? Without essentializing them, because that becomes one of the challenges of global IR, is that once you start talking about regions and sometimes that in some formulations, both by scholars and especially by practitioners in the region, that can start to translate into talk of civilizations. And then you start becoming reductive again. And so we propose this concept as a way to kind of try and capture that balance between the specificity of each region's experience, but also the interlocked experiences and the connectivities, for better or for worse, some of which are very generative, some of which can be weaponized, but the fact that we're connected. So, and then we specifically focus in that article on what we call Afro-Asia. So, and this is simply by virtue of the fact that neither Amelia nor I are Latin Americanist. And because the North Atlantic as a world region has been, got a lot of coverage. And so we wanted to look at Afro-Eurasia, but not as sort of separate regions, as interlocking regions, each with their own center of gravity, each with their own weight, each with their own complexity, but as part of a bigger picture that we can think of in terms of the flows of knowledge and ideas, the flows of resources, and what this basically ends up, to your point, to your question about realism or liberal internationalism, what it does is it provides an alternative bandwidth, epistemologically, but also practically, to think about world affairs. So it's not just a matter of who has the tanks and who has the banks, but it's also, movement of peoples, of global labor. It's the movement of ideas, of refugees. It's the way that we're collectively grappling across regional worlds with climate crisis in ways that percolate into each other's worlds. And so we hope that it's a generative framework, and we do have another piece in the pipeline now, advancing this concept amongst the other works that I've talked about. But in effect, that project, like all of my work, it's problem driven. It's about how to pluralize, not for the sake of just visibility or quantitatively adding more actors and voices to the table, but it's in order to make better sense of real world problems in ways that honor both our similarities and our differences.
So moving on to a couple of questions specifically about the subject of global IR, I want to get both of your take on several ongoing debates revolving around the broader issue. And I understand, and I want to acknowledge at the beginning, that global IR itself is a contested term, and sometimes people use that interchangeably with other calls or initiatives that more or less share a similar orientation of pluralizing knowledge in IR. Here, I want to just qualify at the beginning that we're using global IR strictly in the Ashaya sense, but feel free to bring in other intellectual strengths that you think are relevant. So to start off, I want to ask both of you, global IR is often described also by these advocates and original proponents as an effort to make the discipline of IR more inclusive, plural, and attentive to experience beyond the West. What, in your view, distinguish global IR from simply adding more countries, regions, or non-Western authors to an otherwise unchanged discipline?
Well, I felt that Amitav Acharya really opened a door similar to the early constructivists, in a way that I read the Global IR project as reaching beyond critique and as centering on multiple agency that operates under conditions of institutional cultural diversity. This means, for me, I find it really helpful to read Aisha's book on Before the West and so on. I try to not use the terms West and North and Global South, even worse, because it tends to homogenize something which is not homogeneous at all. And I noticed this. I've been having worked a lot with people who are quite fond of the liberal international order and try to figure out how it might be resilient and survives and so on. And often you see when people are pessimistic about the liberal international order's resilience, they usually look at the international order through US American glasses. It's like it's a barometer kind of falls and rises with the White House administrations. And so it's really an American, North American. I mean, I've worked a lot on Mexico, so I can't use simply United States, because Mexico is also United States. So we need to be specific. So it's an invitation to be specific. It's an invitation to describe correctly, sort of think description. And for me, how do I try to break through these kind of North, South, and so on kind of homogenizing views or concepts? I really go all the way towards the individual, and I see these, I like to zoom into contestations. That's why I feel that, for me, the most convincing method is to do sensitizing reading, see where we find a conflict, and my research objective is of course a conflict about norms. But then you can tell who's involved in the conflict, who is making a legitimate claim, who's sharing into these claims, under what kind of constraints and opportunities are these kind of contestations carried out. And therefore, I also don't like 2x2 tables, so I work with a 3x3, and I basically say, look, whether or not a contestation takes place on a macro scale in global society or global order, you can still have individual sort of contestations or groups of stakeholders making claims. And so through these claims, in a sort of in an abductive way, if you wish, conflicts and contested aspects and expectations can be identified, and then we can see afterwards whether or not they can make a general claim for a larger group. But so this would be focusing on stakeholders and trying to lead beyond kind of the formal institutions that are defined by the philosophy of the Enlightenment. That's why I have this big fight with the Habermasians from Frankfurt, who only will allow for contestation in formalized spaces where elite discourses happen. That's kind of your Habermas in a nutshell. The juxtapose or the opposition or the different way of doing this would be by James Tully's philosophy, where he basically says we don't start with the civil rights that are kind of detailed and legalized in civil spaces, i.e. the institutions of the modern state, but we start with the civic freedoms, civic rights, and those go back to kind of humanitarian rights, human rights, so the rights of the individuals, which means, especially to me, and in my view, kind of in a globalized world where we have so many people who are not passport holders, but live in communities where they have been sharing, look like the Wintrush generation in the UK, who have been sharing in these communities, contributing, paying taxes for decades. And often they don't have the same rights because civil rights are exclusive. So that's kind of why I would say, let's look at when we try to understand kind of the pitfalls and opportunities of global order, try to begin from the vantage point of local practice. That's kind of where I would.
Yeah, thank you. I'm thinking a lot of what Antje is saying regarding sort of the constructivist program and its evolution, and how, at the beginning, you were named something that is intuitive and should be obvious, but it required, a really concerted, insistence and sort of, very thoughtful and thorough kind of ontological, epistemological intervention in order to simply persuade people that, things, the subjectivity is constitutive, the subjectivity is, causal, and a whole sort of, it took so much effort, for the constructivist sort of trailblazers to make that intuition be uploaded to the discipline, and then that paves the way for a second generation of constructivist researchers to think about methodologies and applied spaces and policy implications and so forth. And I think Global AI is kind of going through a similar wave, and so I don't think it can at all be reduced to simply more voices in the room or more voices at the table. It's a much more profound ontological epistemological intervention, as early constructivism was, that says, look, you have built this entire apparatus that is supposedly ahistorical, such as the whole idea of realist, neo-realist sort of structural parsimony, right? And it's supposed to be true for any given time and place. But you're really just omitting in our own times, really. There's very important puzzles that are not explained by what you're talking about. So look at Latin America. You have an entire continent that grapples with endemic violence at the internal and domestic level, but does not suffer from the violence emanating from anarchy, or even the potential potential of violence emanating from anarchy. International relations in Latin America are remarkably pacific, right? There's a very small amount of interstate war, and the tensions and the challenges of the region do not emanate from a foundational condition of anarchy in the way that the IR theory presumes they do. So there's when you have that big an exception to your rule, maybe you should reconsider your rule. And so this is what I think Global IR does, and I think we are at a stage where, including various other interventions, as you said, Sinan, coming from disciplines that may be aligned. Sometimes there's, I think, a lot of attention. At the end of the day, we are academics and we contest and we squabble, and so there's some territorial, kind of claims, and there's narcissism with small differences. But I would say if Global IR is sort of a broad umbrella term, the first generation has been about that ontological epistemological intervention, which is about pluralizing, but it's not necessarily pluralizing quantitatively. It's pluralizing in terms of your worldview, your ability to hold multiple realities at the same time. And to your point about the local, right? And then increasingly, I think we're seeing the crystallization of that, as with constructivism, into a growing amount of interventions in terms of methods. I know of 2 special issues coming out right now on Global IR, methods for Global IR. There's, of course, the Tickner and Karen Smith textbook. Non-Western IR, I would consider it to be an aligned, project. There's another textbook I know has just gone under contract that will be explicitly a Global IR textbook. I think there's some syllabi out there that have gotten a lot of traction. There's a scholar called Denis Kuru who has a wonderful syllabus that he's made available to other, teachers on Academia da Lidio, if anyone is interested. And we're nesting it into. It's still not at a point where, in an overview kind of IR theory textbook, you have the Global IR chapter, the way that you have, the Liberal International chapter, the Realism chapter, the Green Politics chapter, the Feminist chapter. But I think we're on the way to that point. And I think there's momentum, and I think the times call for it. So it's far more than just quantitatively getting more folks in the room. It's far more than going from G7 to G20. It's about opening up your mind to 20 plus different realities and all of the microcosmic realities in between, and connecting all of those realities and 60 and 180 and beyond the nation state. So yes, I think it's a very ambitious project with some family resemblances in its evolution to the way that constructivism has evolved as well.
Thank you for this excellent response. And I think building on what you said about the slow evolution of the Global IR scholarship and the fact that it has recognized the problem of essentialism and trying to rectify that by focusing on the methodology shows that there's progress within the literature. So I want to follow up and sort of reinforce the point about the issue of essentialism and moving forward how people can actually conduct research in a way that acknowledge differences, cultural, historical differences across different societies, different communities, without treating them as internally homogeneous. We're sliding into some sort of relativism. And attached to the question, the bigger picture of Global IR, a lot of them focus on the critique of exclusion. And if this is so far we have been arrived, meaning that we have done the critique and we have recognized the problem of Eurocentrism and there's a problem of exclusion, and then we're now moving forward and advancing our knowledge by, for example, mapping what has been out there, what has been excluded, and delving into the history of that. What would count, in your view, as genuine theoretical progress within Global IR? That I think would be something that, especially for junior scholars, be something quite interesting to know.
I mean, I could just take a stab at that. I mean, I think especially for rising scholars looking to, who are drawn to this approach, and this isn't necessarily a super career strategic move to be drawn to this approach, but I think if you do what you love and pursue, really address puzzles that you find personally compelling, you can then succeed, irrespective of whether it's a super mainstream theory or, an up-and-coming theoretical framework that you situate yourself in. And here, I think it will be a little bit the proof is in the pudding, where sort of rising scholars can think about big challenges out there that everybody's grappling with from the various perspectives. And what is it that this sort of ontologically, epistemologically pluralist, globally diversified lens brings in terms of your ability to answer that question about nuclear? I saw that GIGA had a piece on views on nuclear disarmament from the global south, right? Like that's a huge important question from any IR theoretical angle, and it's a meso-level real world question, and you're bringing together a plurality of global south practices, perspectives to intervene in it. And I think that helps to then not only add real value to, like an analytical value, pragmatic value, potentially guidance for policymakers, normative value in that it's, more representative and there's more voices at the table. But it also helps to mitigate against the, focusing on these specific issues. You do always find that it defaults to contestation between groups, and there is no monolithic perspective. And so, because there is a real danger, to your comment about essentially, there is a real danger that certain, actors in the global south, governments have been taking this idea, like, oh, well, there are these non-Western perspectives, and they've always been marginalized, and so there's a victim narrative, and therefore, whatever we choose to do in our countries is authentic, and you can't question it, even if what we choose to do is like beat our own people over the head with the, it wouldn't be a baseball bat, it would be, another type of bat. And so I think, just continuing to do to following the real world problems and seeing what a global IR lens can bring to it that sheds new light and new perspective and new explanations and new suggestions. And then in the process of doing that, making sure that you're always second guessing your own conceptualization of the actors in question, their agendas, their perspectives, and recognizing it's always contested, it's always political, right? There's going to be interest as well as norms interlacing, and that even narratives about emancipatory narratives about global south perspectives can be weaponized is something else that we just have to bear in mind, and be wary of, be reflexive about in conversations that use this lens.
Well, I see global IR kind of, it's both like it's a disruptive move, but at the same time, it puts things into perspective, historical perspective, regional perspectives. It enables a global community to show their differences, but also to think in terms of we share like a huge kind of box of theories and a toolkit, and it, to me, it is enabling in the way that it doesn't necessarily put a preference for one theory or another. Surely it's critical in one way. But why am I saying this? I think we need to understand that as scholars in international relations, and especially when you are working from Germany, you are in political science. And I'm really a bit skeptical about all the turns that we see in international relations, where people tend to alienate each other, and then turn into more and more into this kind of campfire logic. It gets smaller and smaller. Meanwhile, and we haven't been sort of alert to what's actually happening, the huge structural change. Certainly, I can see it in Germany. And I can see it when I write reviews and of grant applications and so on. The pendulum swung back to the old battles. I mean, in the 80s and 90s, it was the behavioralists and the rational choice people. Now we have what's called evidence-based approaches of causal inference, and they basically, they're not interested in what we actually do, but they are interested. They are. When the quality of a scholar is measured according to whether they published in particular political science journals, usually U.S. American political science journals, maybe they're kind of siblings that grew out of a certainly European context, Northern European context. So what I'm trying to say, I think it's really important to be able to speak to one another, to think in terms, to also think strategically. And as kind of a founding member of the Global International Relations section of the International Studies Association, I mean, even, you know, it's kind of an experience, and it may be an anecdotal evidence, but we have encountered a lot of headwinds, and people kind of say, well, you're not the true global south, and this is kind of not working, you're pluralist, and kind of everything that could be used to alienate this group, which in my view, I mean, it facilitates the opportunity to have a voice and to show your face in a large institution. So I think we need to think more strategically and have a better structural approach by talking to one another rather than declaring something as a catechism, or, you know, that you basically you consider a particular scholar as your Bible, and forgive me, or your Quran or whatever. So it is something, I see it more as a process of interaction and mutual learning and leaving people their own views and going towards a true pluralism of theoretical positions and views, and then we can learn from another. Otherwise, we always run the risk of kind of putting our theoretical and conceptual lenses on, and we see the world in one particular way. And I mean, this period, like the past 3-4 years, have demonstrated quite nicely in real world politics what we then don't see, what we overlook.
Thank you, Antje, for already making the transition from theoretical progress and theoretical prospect to institutional aspect. And that's actually my next question to both of you. Both of you are not only scholars, writers, but also teachers at the university who are cultivating new generations of IR students. So in your view, in general, what institutional barriers do you see to advancing global IR? Specifically, do you hear either from your colleagues or your students, or experience yourself difficulties to get published without using or using non-Western theory in your research? And how widespread, in your view, has global IR as a topic been incorporated into existing syllabus?
Yeah, I mean, just sort of anecdotally, I can say that I have one piece, actually it wasn't the one on, it's in the issue on interlocking regional worlds, but it's my standalone piece, which is on it's on post-Ottoman and Turkish sort of experience of trauma in the confronting Western hegemony. And this is a way that many different former empires, I'm explaining the research agenda first to explain why I had a barrier, an institutional barrier that I faced with it. So basically, I came up with this argument that said that countries like Turkey, Iran, China, although we can use the post-colonial toolkit to sometimes analyze them, it doesn't quite fit, but nor does, say, the political science sort of standard issue toolkit either. And we have to understand the way that history and memory and resentments and anxieties play into things. And so for this, and so I was theorizing inductively from this experience of countries that are these imperial successor states that are not Western, but they're not really properly colonized countries either. I was theorizing this concept that I call the capitulation syndrome, which is, you know, basically between being a post-imperial power and being a post-colonial power. Okay, so it's an idea. It's inductively generating from these non-Western, quote-unquote non-Western experiences, a concept. And I submitted this to a theory journal, and I got desk rejected flat out saying, this is not theory. Because it can't be theory if it's not already engaged with the established Western-centric canon, right? And so, yeah, it took me many years, and finally I just did my own special issue so that I could generate a space where, you know, I could get uptake for this piece. And I think by that time the conversation had evolved enough that it was possible. And in the meantime, you know, of course, you have to pay the bills, you have to, you know, there's life, there's surprises. And so it's not easy for sure to advocate for a perspective that, as particularly in the North American context, is still quite peripheral. But spaces have been opened, right, in the past decade or so. And I think in the EU context, it's probably, there's already more receptivity to sort of more interdisciplinary and historically informed, sociologically informed, critical type of work. So I think there's probably, and there's I think more opportunities in the EU via also postdocs and many different kind of funding schemes where you don't need that tenure track position in order to be able to survive as an academic. So I'm a little bit less optimistic about the US context, and that was even before the current administration re-ensconced itself in a way that is not friendly to this type of work. But in the EU context, I certainly think in Global South context, this is boomtown, especially if you want to work on global IR projects. I think in East Asia, in South Asia, in some parts of the Middle East and Latin America and so forth. I mean, some people might then defer more towards like a decolonial approach, or they use different labels. But again, thinking of this as sort of shorthand and these are line frameworks. There the pitfalls and the dangers are a bit different, right? It's about being there. The dangers maybe about being co-opted to illiberal national projects, illiberal foreign policy projects that kind of try to weaponize your research and the authenticity claims that on which some of the research is based. Different set of challenges, but I would say, yeah, there's especially as the world is changing rapidly in ways where you simply cannot ignore Global South agency anymore. If you want to have a meaningful policy agenda, the Iran war being recently concluded Iran war being a classic, like a very, very clear case in point. You have the U.S. administration that seemed to believe that hard power was going to be all that was necessary, was going to be all that it took, leverage that hard power in a way that Iran has emerged, except for the thousands of people who have died, Iran has emerged as a net winner in the situation. I think incontestably. I mean, they have don't get me started on that. Don't get me started on that. I just have talking about it. In any case, that's, for example, perhaps I will write an op-ed about why a global IR lens would have been a better guide to U.S. policymakers over the past few months in the treatment of Iran than the sort of neo-realist reductionism that they appear to have relied on. So in any case, I think problem-driven wise, there's space for it. Lots of parts of the world where the pathway is wide open. I think European academe and ecosystems seem to be relatively more open to it. US is not maybe the happiest place in the world to be pursuing this agenda.
Well, again, I mean, Europe isn't Europe. I wonder what you call European. From the outside, clearly in Germany, I mean, there's no space for critical IR, let alone global IR. So I mean, I'm the outgoing chair here in Hamburg, and after me there won't be any IR in the sense. So that's dead then, and there's we don't see the programs that would support what we're doing. So again, I think we need to come back to a more structural, a strategic aspect where we need to think in terms of who are the assigned reviewers for research applications in the big national research foundations, which are moving towards the quantitative and in a big way at the moment. And it's not just in Germany, but like you see it also for the ERC on the European level, if you wish. So and then people are asked to publish in so-called gold standard journals, which are mainly quant and evidence based. But I mean, I don't want to just end in doom and gloom, but you can actually also create your own journal, which I have done 15 years ago, and it took us a long time. But boom, we are now at an impact factor of 2.4, so we are where we wanted to be, and we have people coming in from a very diverse group of perspectives. Even though the journal is called Global Constitutionalism, the fun one of the background of this strategy was there is no such thing as global constitutionalism. It is just an agora for people to interact, and that's what we wanted to have. And as a journal editor, I could say we need to do much more with regard to foreign language submissions. I mean, it's often a matter of language, and then people from whose first language isn't English then sometimes try to submit in English, but then the beauty of the language is reduced in a certain way. So we try to encourage people to seek translation service, but I mean that's now getting a little easier with with AI. So I see that there is a path there, but again I come back to the point where we need to support each other. If we want to do global IR and we want to maintain the pluralism of it, then we need to think in terms of how can we do that together? I would, for instance, encourage also having a pool, and I think we'll do that with the global IR section and ISA, not just for utilitarian purposes, because how many times when we submit something for publication, we get the manuscript kind of comes back and reviewer number 2 says, oh, where are your Global South people? And we can't just contact people from the Global South. I just was once approached with that sort of request, and I thought, but hey, wait a minute, where does the Global South actually start? I mean, do I talk to somebody who is an American and teaches in Columbia, or do I speak to somebody who is a Turk and is at Cambridge, or what's the story, or who is like a fellow like you, Sinan, here at the GIGA, which seems to be perfectly fine. But so I think we need to. We are sometimes not really clear about what the global is and what aspects of the global we want to turn to in order to make our view on international relations more sort of inclusive and more encompassing. I think that should be the thing, that it just doesn't just account for yet another region. And also, I think we run the risk of trying to kind of go back to ancient times when the world was a better place. I don't think that we should be able to think in terms of where do we want to go. I hate this term futuring. I don't think that's the way to go, because people start dreaming and it turns into kind of into a kind of fadism, if you wish. But we need to think more specifically and systematically about a future that we want to go, including the ethical background that we want to carry along. And for that, we require a lot more interaction.
Thank you both for these excellent points from both your scholarly knowledge, but also your own professional experience. I think now is a good time to perhaps turn the conversation back to the room, where we have other audience members who might want to pose questions to these two scholars.
Okay, thanks so much. I think we're gonna stop the recording for the questions. Thank you so much for joining us. I think this was a highly interesting conversation. I especially enjoyed both of your calls for community building and for working together, and I think that can be a good motivation for all of us. If you have watched until here, thank you so much. I can also recommend for you to watch our first episode with Rudra Sil and Eileen Doherty-Sil, which we have recorded last year in November. And please watch this space for future episodes. Thank you so much.